Welcome to Sound Beginnings, the Sound Birth Services podcast. I'm your host, Pamela Tessman, mother of two, an international board-certified lactation consultant, childbirth educator, and former doula and early childhood educator. Based in the beautiful Comox Valley, I've spent 20 years supporting families, and I'm here to share insights, tips, and stories about childbirth and infant feeding. Whether you're expecting your first baby, navigating infant feeding, or you're a perinatal professional adding to your skills and knowledge, this podcast is your trusted resource for expert, evidence-based advice and heartfelt conversations, empowering you with the knowledge and confidence to nurture your growing family. Be sure to follow me on social media at Soundbirths, or connect with me at my website at soundbirths.ca. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Sound Beginnings podcast. I'm your host, Pamela, and today I am joined by Tasha Page, who is a counselor here in the Comox Valley, as well as virtual throughout BC. She's dedicated to supporting folks through grief and transition, specializing in perinatal mental health from pre-pregnancy through to the early years of parenting. So welcome, Tasha. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I want to just sort of just jump right into your story. So can you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to work in this field?
So I would say that in this field in general, started from a very young age. My mom raised me to have a strong social conscience and want to support people and yeah, just have a presence in the world where I was offering help to people. And so I did my BSW, my Bachelor of Social Work, fairly quickly out of high school, and then worked in frontline social work in Victoria for quite a few years in a variety of different settings, which I think that experience, while challenging for sure at
Mm-hmm.
times, also has really fed my practice framework even now, and really gave me a really strong sense of social justice and the importance of access to support and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I went on to do a master's in intercultural communications, thinking that I wanted to get off the front lines and off sort of supporting people directly and doing things from a more systemic level. But then my partner and I decided we wanted to have kids, and it was not as easy as I thought it would be. So we went through um, fertility challenges and ultimately IVF. And through that experience, and then subsequently, when I became pregnant with my kiddos, I have twins, I was put on bed rest for 3 months. And I really noticed the level of isolation that I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and managed to find a community of people through Instagram, of all things. I created a
Right.
separate Instagram handle and found other women going through similar experiences, but really felt like, man, oh man, would it have been nice if there was somebody that I could talk to who really had this experience. So not
Uh-huh.
just sort of training in the area necessarily, or like was a counselor generally, but somebody who there could be a little bit of relating to.
Mm-hmm. A
And
deep understanding in it.
exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. And then I went on to subsequently have some pregnancy losses as well. And it was the same thing. I was so inspired. The pregnancy losses, I found my community through disclosing. At the time I was working for Island Health, and I disclosed to one of the nurses that I worked with, like, hey, I'm in the middle of a miscarriage. And suddenly all of these women started showing up at my office door being like, I still remember, like, I still think of the baby that I lost, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And those women were so impactful for me, and just sort of not normalize the experience, but in a way normalize that experience, and made me see the value again in finding folks that will talk about it and
Mm-hmm.
not be afraid to talk about it.
Right.
So then I went back and I did another master's in clinical social work, and I volunteered for Postpartum Support International, which is an international organization, primarily in the US and Canada, but they do operate all over the world. that supports women through like perinatal mood disorders, starting from like fertility challenges and pregnancy loss through to the first few years postpartum.
Amazing.
Um, and then I did advanced training with them as well, and knew that the end goal was to go into private practice to specialize in this area. And so currently, I would say a lot of my clients are within that realm of thinking about having children. They have children, they're currently pregnant, they're going through um, fertility treatments. But I have found through my practice that it extends further than that sort of like first year postpartum. And I've just started saying that I think postpartum lasts way more than a year
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's constantly evolving. Your
Mm-hmm.
body is still changing
Yeah,
for time like some
I
time to
agree.
come.
Yeah, especially if you have someone who is doing extended breastfeeding too, right? Like
Yes.
we now recommend breastfeeding up to 2 years, and if you're one of those people who can do that, then you're still in postpartum for sure.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I nursed my boys until they were about 2.5 or so, and I absolutely
Mm,
remember that. I did not feel at all like my body was my own necessarily
yeah.
until
Mm,
after they had weaned.
mm-hmm.
Um, and then that there continued to be hormonal changes
Oh
and
yeah.
mood changes and all of these things. So I really like to stress, like, even though I say I work in that perinatal period, like I think it's really important to continue to support parents
Mm-hmm.
through all of those big transitions that we go through.
Yeah.
And I've also started seeing couples because I'm realizing more and more how important it is to support the parenting unit, if there is a
Yeah.
unit, as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful. That's great to know. I will stick that in my back pocket for future families. Yeah. And so I wanted to go back to, you mentioned an Instagram handle for that community of people who are experiencing fertility issues. Do you still have that Instagram handle?
I still have it. I don't post in it.
Okay.
The interesting thing about it, though, is my mother and I, because my mother is an author, have recently signed a contract with Demeter Press to
Oh,
write an anthology on the experience of infertility and the mental health implications.
amazing.
So I'm writing a piece for it myself, and then we're gathering. We've had a ton of submissions. They're really amazing from the academic community, like the artist community,
Mm,
um, folks that just want to tell their story, folks that have done some really amazing research on infertility. So for my own piece, I'm pulling some of the posts from that Instagram because I
okay.
that was essentially my diary at the time.
Oh, wow.
I've actually made it private, and the reason for that actually is
Mm,
because there's picture it was public, but there's pictures of my boys on there when they were young,
right. Mm,
and I was sort of feeling like I don't have their consent to do this,
yeah.
so I
Yeah.
need to stop.
Yeah, that's awesome. Please let me know when that's all
I
out and
will.
published, and I'll share
I
it.
will for
Hmm.
sure. We're just getting like we've in the spring we've figured out everybody that's going to be in the book. We got abstracts and everything, and actually their final piece is due in the next couple weeks.
Mm.
So I should keep writing, but um,
Pressure's on.
right. So I think we're hoping for sort of mid next year it'll be published and out.
Okay,
So and we'll
great.
probably do a few readings and stuff like that just to kind of get the word out in the community as well.
Awesome. That is so exciting. Very
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, well, actually, that's one of my questions that I had for you today was book recommendations. Is there any other books at this point that you often find yourself recommending to clients?
Um, Good Mums Have Scary Thoughts
Mm,
is one that comes up a lot.
mm-hmm.
And I love, and they are a bit more academic, but I do love a lot of the stuff. There's a lot of work put out by Demeter Press and Andrea O'Reilly on like motherhood studies
Mm,
and that experience. And there's also Demeter has, I think I'm looking at my bookshelf, but I'm at my home office, so I don't. It's at my other office. I
right.
can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but there's one on pregnancy loss that I found really impactful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Andrea O'Reilly just recently released like an anthology of all of her work,
Mm.
and all of her sort of research. And I say research, but it's relatively easy to read
Right.
research.
Mm-hmm.
There's another book that's amazing. I can't remember the name of the author, called I Had a Miscarriage.
Mm.
And when I had my miscarriages, I picked that book up multiple times.
Mm. Great. I will put all of those in the show notes, and if you want to send me anything else after we talk today,
Yeah,
let me
I
know, and I
will.
can add those as well for resources for folks. So let's talk about a few signs of perinatal mood disorders and what they are and what people can look out for.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the most important things to note about perinatal mood disorders is often what we see sort of in the media and like in the general conversations about these things is either postpartum depression or the really sort of extreme examples of postpartum
Mm-hmm.
psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important to note that there is more than one type of perinatal mood disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So we can see depression, we can see anxiety, we can see obsessive compulsive disorder, we can see psychosis, and also that these things don't actually necessarily start postpartum. Folks can start to experience symptoms while pregnant
Mm-hmm.
of many of these mood disorders. So, for the two most common for depression, with depression, you'd be looking for feelings of anger, of irritability, of rage. We hear a lot about mom rage these
Mm-hmm.
days, but it's when that rage is sort of really impacting your day to day. Lack of interest in the baby, lack of appetite, sleep disturbances beyond the normal waking up to feed babe and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of crying and sadness, feelings of guilt, shame, or hopelessness, loss of interest, joy, or pleasure in things that you used to enjoy, and possible thoughts of harming the baby or yourself.
Mm.
The other one that I see a lot um, on sort of different areas of the spectrum on this, like some symptoms more severe. A lot of folks, it's not uncommon to experience some symptoms is anxiety. So with postpartum anxiety, we'd be looking for things like constant worry, feeling that something really bad is going to happen, racing thoughts, um, those intrusive thoughts that you hear a lot about,
Mm-hmm.
um, disturbances of sleep and appetite, inability to sit still, and then physical symptoms like dizziness, hot flashes, nausea, lots of headaches, that sort of thing.
Oh, interesting. That's
Um,
probably one that people don't often think of is those physical symptoms, hey?
yes, absolutely. And I think we get so disconnected between the mind and the physical body. And it's interesting. I was talking to my son the other day about where we feel nervousness in our body. And I said, isn't it funny that you can feel like that emotion in your body? And he sort of looked at me in his 8-year-old wisdom and was like, well, of course you can, Mom. Your mind is in your body. So it's easy for an 8-year-old to understand that like those somatic symptoms exist.
Yeah,
But I think the older we get, the more sort of disconnected we get between the two. So
true.
really noticing those actual physical symptoms is huge. And one of the things I often find I have to do with folks is help them start to be able to identify those because that's often the first indicator that something's going on for them.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard to, like, when you were talking about the depression and how you, oh, well, and the anxiety and how you can have these sort of like scary thoughts, these intrusive thoughts or thoughts of harming yourself or your baby. That must be really hard to admit to yourself and reach out for help about. Do you have any tips on how people can kind of get past that threshold of needing help and not sure how to reach out for that?
I think the biggest thing for me and the first thing I do when somebody comes in and says, hey, I've been having these intrusive thoughts is to normalize it.
Mm.
And to let people know that even if you're having intrusive thoughts, and often the problem with intrusive thoughts is they can be violent or sexual in nature. So
Mm.
they're very contrary to anything that is in your own character that you would actually do. So they're quite repulsive and they can be really hard to report to somebody. But the very nature of you being repulsed by them tells us that actually, you're probably not going to act on these
Yeah.
thoughts. And so just normalizing that experience. And for some people, if the intrusive thoughts is if someone is suffering from severe depression, and the intrusive thoughts are around harming themselves, again, to normalize that this is an experience that is had by people. And the thing about perinatal mood disorders is that they are treatable. And so even if someone is feeling severely depressed and is having thoughts around harming themselves, there are strategies through maybe talking to their GP, looking at potential medication, getting in touch with a therapist, seeing a therapist, maybe a support group, making sure we have that wraparound support for somebody. They will be well.
Yes.
This won't last forever.
Yes. Yeah, it's just a matter of hitting that button,
Yes.
sending that email, and yeah.
Yeah. And I think, from my perspective as like a social worker and a therapist, and I know many of the other folks that I work with, professionals, like we come from a place of non-judgment. Like it doesn't, there's not much someone can say to me that is going to shock me because my job is to be here to support you.
Yeah.
Um,
And you already have that experience yourself, some of that, the
yeah,
struggles around, becoming pregnant and postpartum and all those things. So I think that really helps for folks to see that they're coming to a therapist who has experience and a background, and because of that has deep empathy and compassion for what you're dealing with.
absolutely. Absolutely. My goal is to get you the support you need. And even in extreme examples where somebody may need to do some safety planning, if somebody were to come to me and express that they were thinking about self-harm, I think that one of the biggest concerns that comes up for folks is suddenly the police or MCFD, like the Ministry of Children and Family Development, is going to show up at their door and their baby's going to be taken away. And my perspective is let's put a safety plan in place and make sure that you're safe. And part of that safety plan involves keeping you with your baby and making sure that you're getting the support that you need. It's not about the authorities whisking in, and so just to really like calm, if I can calm folks' worries about that.
Right.
That's not my practice.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm legally obligated to report in cases where there's really extreme examples. I've never had to do that. It's always been about safety planning.
Yeah. It's not like the movies.
Exactly, exactly. Oh, I hate the way social workers are portrayed in the
Yeah.
movies.
Yeah. I bet you do. You probably cringe.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to the list of perinatal mood disorders?
Um, there's a few things that I wanted to touch on. One being around those intrusive thoughts again. The thoughts that are sort of out of character for you, and pop up and maybe make you change your behavior. And so I think that's something that we just need to watch for. So if you are having continuing intrusive thoughts, and they say, for example, you visualize yourself accidentally dropping baby down the stairs, and it's getting to the point where you can't walk down the stairs, then that's really a situation that these intrusive thoughts are really starting to take over, and an indication that it's time to get some support for sure.
Good tip.
Because then we start bridging into things like OCD.
Right.
And there's lots that can be done to treat people, and get them feeling more comfortable and start to eliminate some of those thoughts and behaviors. But without the support, it can become quite debilitating for people. And it's way more common than we think because people don't talk about it.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you used the example of dropping your baby down the stairs because I had that exact thought with my first son,
Yes.
quite a few times. Not to the point that I couldn't go downstairs, but it's so surprising when you have those thoughts just pop into your head. You're like, where did that come from and why?
Yes.
And that's so upsetting to think about. So I think like as you're navigating parenting for the first time, or maybe not for the first time, you're navigating parenting, you're healing from birth, you're learning how to feed your baby, and then you're having these really surprising parenting thoughts all of a
Yes.
sudden. Like, it's such a wild ride. And yeah, I'm just so thankful that we have people like you to reach out to, because I certainly would have benefited from seeing someone around those thoughts for sure.
Oh, yeah. Me too. That's why I do
Yeah.
the work that I
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I wanted to touch on is just risk factors because
Mm,
one of the things I work with a lot of folks who are currently pregnant or are, looking to get pregnant. And so one of the things that I like to do, not to scare people, is to talk about risk factors and talk about some safety planning in advance if something were to happen and they were
right.
to start experiencing symptoms of a perinatal mood disorder.
Yeah.
So things like history of depression or anxiety, or even a family history of depression or anxiety, put folks at a slightly higher risk.
Mm,
High risk pregnancies, complicated pregnancies, previous pregnancy losses. We see a lot of anxiety
mm,
following that. A lack of support. So when people are feeling really isolated, not getting support in the form of like the village, friends, family, that sort of thing. History of substance use or using substances to manage some of those bigger feelings. Domestic violence is huge.
mm,
Um, and then, like in marginalized communities, we see perinatal mood disorders more frequently. So, folks that are low income, racial minorities, new immigrants, particularly folks that have immigrated within the last 5 years or so, lack of housing, lack of employment, all of those things make I mean, there's just those added stressors in those people's lives, and therefore they're at a higher risk. And then just other stressful life events.
right.
So things like losing a parent or an illness in the family, those sort of things all contribute to, a little bit of an increased risk for perinatal mood disorders. And it's not to say that that's definitely going to happen, but it's something to be aware of so that there can be a little bit more sort of safety planning in advance done.
Yeah. Great tips for sure. I think it's really helpful for people to hear what you're feeling is normal. I really believe in what you said prior to, like, if you're feeling repulsed by or like surprised by the thoughts you're having, it really shows that it's not you thinking those
Exactly.
thoughts, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we know that you're a caring parent just because of the fact that you're worrying about that. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think somebody said to me early in my parenting journey, the fact that you're worrying about being a good parent tells me that you're a good parent. And I
yeah.
really believe that's true. If any of these thoughts or these feelings or the way that, yeah, the way you're feeling is making you worry about the impact on your little one, you're doing a good job and nobody is judging how you are as a parent. It's about
Yeah.
getting you the support. And oh, I could rant forever about the
Oh,
lack of support for moms.
I
So,
know.
well, parents in general, I think
Yeah.
dads or non-birthing partners are sort of, oh, they're fine. And
Yeah.
and they need support too.
They really do. I went and did a lactation consult in someone's home the other day, and the dad opened the door, and this was the second time that I had seen them, and he opened the door and he just looked exhausted and just so different from the first time I had seen them. The first time I had seen them, baby was rather new and they were kind of still in that glow, like, wow, look what we made. And then the reality of like learning to breastfeed and the disrupted sleep and all that sets in, and I think he's also working from home, and oh, it was just, I could see it in his face, and I just
Yeah.
felt so bad for him because he's supporting, he's the supporter, right? So
Yes.
mom's learning how to breastfeed, and also dealing with a physical injury, And so he's, picking up the slack everywhere else. So it's not like partners are doing any less work, and they
No,
certainly do deserve a lot of support as well.
absolutely. I think back to my husband was off the first month after my twins were born. And I think back to probably the first 6 months after they were born and him getting up and going to work every day after being up every hour on the hour to help me and the
Yeah.
babies.
Oh,
That was tough too, right? Like it
yeah.
was tough for everybody.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's such an adjustment. It's such a new phase in life that there's not really, there's lots of books you can read, but I think a lot of it is learning through experience, and
Hmm.
that can be really
Totally.
hard.
Yeah.
So, what does a session with you look like?
So I call myself an eclectic client centered practitioner. So I'm trained in quite a few different modalities. Um, and but I don't like to only use one unless someone comes in and says, "Hey, I just want you to do like solution focused therapy with me because I want to walk out with a tool and know what I'm doing and away we go." So for me, when I first meet with a client, I get to know them. I hear their story, but also get an idea of what their support network is, their experience with therapy, what's worked for them, what hasn't. And then we kind of come up with a plan. So for some folks, they really want me to give them tools and homework to do. And so for some folks, I have people that come in and they basically use the 50 minutes to tell me the crap that's going on that's frustrating them or upsetting them. Um, and and we talk about that in a therapeutic way. Um, and then for some folks, if they come to me specifically for trauma, I like to use accelerated resolution therapy primarily for trauma, which is a really interesting evidence based modality where we do bilateral stimulation and try and replace negative images associated with trauma with more positive ones. It's much different than a typical talk therapy session, but it is quite impactful for well, the evidence, like the literature shows us that it's quite impactful, but it so far, most of my clients have had really good feedback on it. And when you train in it, you have to do it. And I had a great experience
Right.
too.
Oh, good.
So I do use that primarily for trauma. Um, but otherwise, if it, sometimes people will come in and we'll do one of those sessions and then we'll do a more talk therapy session. I tell everybody that I work with that if you don't like something that I've done or something doesn't resonate with you, you're never going to hurt my feelings. Tell me, like, this isn't working. I wonder if you could, I have a couple clients right now who say, like, I just want you to be real with me and call me on my shit. And for some people that doesn't work. And for some
Yep.
people it does. So
Yep.
I try and really center my client in the therapy in that they get to guide the process.
Yeah.
The other thing that I do incorporate a lot of, and I find most people are quite receptive to, is mindfulness, and not in a way where we're creating expectations that you have one more thing on your plate. Like make sure you get your 30 minutes of meditation in every
Right.
day. But just talking about moments where we can use informal mindfulness and maybe brief little like 5 minute snippets for like this is the moment that you're going to take to re-regulate your nervous system and calm those anxious thoughts and that sort of thing. And so I really like using that
I guess that's
as well.
something that you could have your clients do while they're waiting for an appointment with you. Is
Yes.
that a common tool that you use to send them
Yeah.
home with? Yeah.
Yeah. Like I typically it's not uncommon for me to send them home with a few different mindfulness tools or even like guided. I really love mindful self compassion. So there's some really great resources online for that that are totally free. So
Oh,
I will send
amazing.
them home with like, here's some little snippets that you can try in those little quiet moments that you might get.
Uh-huh.
And just think about those moments where you can use it, where, like you say, you're sitting and waiting for an appointment. So this is a
Yeah.
moment where you can just recognize your thoughts, label them, and let them float away like leaves on a river.
Yeah. And so that's what you would say mindfulness is, because I think that word gets used so much. And like, even sometimes I'm like, I thought I understood it, but now I'm like, what actually is mindfulness? It's just sort of like being aware of your surroundings and your bodily sensations and your thoughts and things like that, right?
And being present, really,
Mm,
like
mm-hmm,
allowing yourself to be in the present moment,
mm-hmm.
um,
Even if it's difficult.
even if it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and that's the other thing we talk about a lot is sitting with the discomfort is so important sometimes.
Mm,
Like, yeah, I am angry right now, and
mm.
anger is an okay feeling, and anger is often telling us that we have an unmet need. So let's sit with that and figure out what that need is.
Yeah. And that anger is such a tricky emotion to feel in parenthood.
Yes.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh. Yeah.
In parenthood, and I also think there's kind of a cultural history there of anger's not okay. Like when you
True.
think about the amount of like, oh, you're having a tantrum, go to your room, and that's not a safe emotion. And so when we grow up thinking that anger isn't safe and anger is not okay, I think that that can translate into parenthood in a significant way. And then we
Right.
can be easily triggered by our kids' tantrums, our kids' big
Mm-hmm.
feelings,
Mm-hmm.
as well as our own. And I think, I mean, we hear about mom rage all the time now.
Yeah.
And I would argue that mom rage is, and the literature showing us that mom rage is pretty closely connected to that unmet need and not allowing ourselves to sit in that and figure out what it is that we need.
Right. Work through that shame, that history of shame around those
Yes.
feelings.
Yeah, and I think historically, like what shame, like when you say shame, shame comes up a lot
Mm.
in sessions. There's, I mean, I think even more pressure probably on parents now with social media, and people are parenting
Yeah.
in a different way, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So then when we aren't perfect, the shame comes in
Mm-hmm.
so much. And so often a lot of it is like, it's okay to talk about this. This is a safe space.
Right.
These thoughts are actually way more normal than you would think.
Yeah.
um, and acknowledging that shame and working through it is a huge part of I'm finding what I do for sure.
Yeah. Amazing. Oh, I wish I had you when I was going through the early years with my kids. My kids are now 14 and 11, and it's like a totally different ball game.
I bet. I
But
bet.
yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of ball game, my youngest actually just suffered a concussion at his
Oh
football game this
no.
Saturday. So I'm kind of
Oh.
like doing deep dives on like healing and trying to
Yeah.
figure out where to go from here. Luckily, it's super minor and he's doing
Oh,
really
good.
well, but that kind of
That's
thing is always scary with
it.
kids.
It's really scary. Both my boys ski race and BMX race and mountain bike.
Mm.
And so I'm acutely aware of
Oh,
the potential of a head injury
yeah.
and don't want to take that joy from them. They love it.
Exactly. Yes, this is my battle too because my oldest loves to mountain bike and he's just doing crazy stuff on his
Yeah.
bike and on the trampoline and it's just sort of I can't
Yes.
stop them.
No,
So,
no.
yeah, maybe I
Yeah.
need to come talk to you about all of that. What would you say friends and loved ones can do to help someone who's going through some grief or trauma or perinatal depression or anxiety?
So the grief piece, I think the biggest thing is acknowledging the grief.
Hmm.
Whether it's like a pregnancy loss or stillbirth or something like that, or the disenfranchised grief that we experience with infertility, or even grief around like I had these expectations. This is what my pregnancy and my birth was going to be like, and they weren't at all like that.
Mm-hmm.
All of those experiences create disenfranchised grief, which is this phenomenon where we are grieving in a very real way, but we don't have any of the cultural traditions and norms around it. So there's typically, or there's often not any sort of ceremony. People aren't, bringing you over casseroles and checking
Mm,
in with you in the same way. And there's also some, perhaps it feels uncomfortable or taboo to bring up some of those things,
mm-hmm.
but naming it, particularly in the case of a stillbirth or a pregnancy loss, if the child was had a name, use their name. check in
Mm-hmm.
with them. Don't be afraid to ask. If they don't want to talk about it,
They'll
they'll
say
tell
it.
you they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But hey, like I've been thinking of you. How are things going?
Mm-hmm.
Um, offering, I mean, in the case of anything, whether it's grief or say a perinatal mood disorder, offering support and like concrete support. And I always say to people, don't offer to go hold the baby unless that's what they want. Maybe go
Yes.
fold their laundry.
Yes.
Maybe
Wash
cook
their
them a
dishes.
meal, wash
Yeah.
their dishes,
Mm-hmm.
just that concrete stuff that can feel so big and has so much shame attached to it. Like my
Yep.
kitchen's a mess, I'm a crappy mom. Well,
Yep.
no, your kitchen's a mess because you have a brand new baby at home and maybe
Yeah.
you're living with a mood disorder right now and that's very
Yeah.
real.
And recovering. Like your own body's been
Yes,
through a lot too. And yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. The bounce back culture is a little bit damaging.
Yes. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh, yeah. The other thing is respecting boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Big one.
Huge. We
Yeah.
talk about that a lot. And that's one of the reasons why I encourage people who are pregnant to do a bit of a postpartum mental health plan, because
Mm-hmm.
in those plans you can write out like, no, I don't want visitors for the first week, or no, I only want visitors at this time. And those things obviously can change,
Yeah.
but if you have those conversations with your partner before baby arrives, then you can be on the same page. You can assign a point person to set the boundaries if you have tricky people in your life who may not
Mm-hmm.
respect them,
Yeah.
so that the birthing person doesn't have to be fighting
Put
those
on the
fights
spot.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I have a piece of advice for when I was working with doula clients, and when I teach childbirth classes and we talk about postpartum, we work on those like tricky relationships outside of the unit. And if somebody is feeling like there's someone who may not respect the boundaries, or someone who they feel is gonna it's going to be a hard conversation with them, I recommend getting them a little gift, because they are
Love
becoming
that.
a grandparent, they're becoming an aunt, whoever they are, a little gift and a card. And, you know, just say in the card, we're so excited to watch you become grandma. You're going to be awesome. Here's what we're planning for our first couple weeks, and we'll let you know when we're ready for you to come meet your grandbaby. And we're all so excited, and thanks for understanding. And then it kind of like softens
Yes,
the blow.
absolutely. I love that. That's a
Yeah.
great idea.
Yeah. So I don't know if anybody has done it, but at least getting that advice out there to talk to your family about those things, I think is really important, because I think there's a lot of families who don't quite understand how difficult those first couple weeks are going to be, in terms of
Hmm.
how tender you're feeling emotionally,
Hmm.
how private you're going to be feeling, and how any other stimulation might be just a little bit too overwhelming.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's a bit of that sort of amnesia thing that happens where the
Mm,
grandparents may not remember
right.
what it was like, 30, 35 longer
Yeah.
ago. So having a gentle reminder is maybe important
Yeah.
for some of those folks.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah.
So I think also having, just like you would have on your fridge for like a babysitter, like these are the emergency phone numbers,
Mm-hmm.
having those numbers, like these are the people I can call for support if I am really
Yes.
overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
So things like Postpartum Support International has a warm line, they call it, where you can
Mm.
call in for support. Oh my gosh. There's another organization based out of Vancouver that has like a toll-free number you can call that often has counselors on the line. I don't know what their
Is
hours of
that
operation are.
Pacific
Yes.
postpartum? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll list that in the show notes too.
Yeah. And then if there's anybody that that can offer support, um yeah, like phone numbers for emergency mental health if need be. Like just having those available. You may never use them,
Mm-hmm.
but then they're there, or even the nurses line, because sometimes especially if we're feeling extra anxious, anything happens with baby, we need someone to reassure us, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Oh yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I love that, putting all the information on the fridge so it's easily accessed too, so you're not digging for it somewhere.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Important. Is there anything you wish people understood better about perinatal mental health?
Well, I mean, probably a lot.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I,
there's
th-
so
I
much
I
to
wish that
say.
the general population better understood the incredible emotional impact of things like infertility and pregnancy loss.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I think about how fertility, like IVF, is portrayed in the media as often, well, especially now. I'm not going to get into the political
Yeah.
conversation, but I think a better understanding of, these are people who really have this strong desire to grow their family, and
Mm-hmm.
um, it's been a tough road, and the research shows us that the emotional impact of fertility treatments is similar to that of cancer treatment. So it's
Really?
massively impactful.
Wow. Wow.
Um, so I think that would be huge. I also think understanding that perinatal mood disorders are nothing that a parent has done. There, you are absolutely not to
Mm-hmm.
blame for it,
Mm-hmm.
and with support, things can get better,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes that support needs to be, a bit of a team, right? Like you pull on the people in your village to support you. Perhaps you talk to your GP about medication, definitely therapy, support groups. There's all sorts of tools that we can use, and
Mm-hmm.
all of those things exist to help people be well again, and
Right.
that is absolutely possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love that. I can tell that people who come to see you are probably just so well resourced after seeing you, and also just probably feeling really heard and understood. And that in itself is huge
Thank you.
because sometimes we just, yeah, we just need somebody to listen to. Yeah.
And that's yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, in a safe way where you're
Mm-hmm.
not worried about being judged.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've heard it all in general, in my years of social work.
Oh, I'm
I've heard
sure.
there's never judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And to come back to what we wish people knew more about perinatal mental health, I always kind of come back to partners because
Yes.
partners are kind of like they end up getting this like deer in the headlights look like, "Oh my God, my beloved is having such a hard time and I don't quite understand why
Yes.
and I don't know how to help them." Do you have
Yes.
any tips about that?
I'm really glad you brought that up because I meant to bring that up.
Mm.
I think one piece, it's important to know that not only is that really overwhelming and scary,
Mhm.
but 10% of partners, like non-birthing people, do actually experience perinatal mood disorders.
Right.
Um, to yeah, I mean, I think not being afraid to reach out for support, even for yourself as a partner.
Mm. Mhm.
um, there are online groups for like non-birthing people, to get support, um, and find people with similar experience. Familiarize yourself with the resources and what to look for,
Mhm.
and care for yourself.
Huge.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like obviously you need to support your partner and the baby and all of those things, and you cannot do that unless you care for yourself. um
Yeah, which means, time away for yourself,
yes,
doing the things that you loved before baby arrived,
yes,
making time for those things. Hmm.
yeah, yeah, I struggle with the concept of self-care sometimes because I think, when we hear self-care we think people having bubble baths, and
Hmm.
it's so much
Going for
more than that.
massages and yeah,
Yes, yeah,
yeah,
it's
which
so
is
much more than
awesome
that.
too, actually. That's a great
Yes,
way to support your nervous system, but,
yes,
that's sometimes hard to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, and even finding those quiet moments. That's why I love giving my clients those like 5-minute self-compassion mindfulness meditations, right? Maybe you
Mm,
can have that little moment, and accessing mental health services for yourself, even if you're not the one living with the perinatal mood disorder.
yeah.
um, yeah, it's hard and it's scary, and
Hmm.
so finding the support that you can, that's self-care.
Hmm. Yeah, it's simple. It can be simple.
Hmm.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, and I think like you touched on before with like making a list. I think that's a great idea to put together specifically for local resources.
Yes,
Before you have baby, planning for your postpartum mental health, as you said, includes like searching out all these resources ahead of time so that you're not in this mental state that's really, impacting you in your ability to cope throughout the day. Because how do
Yeah.
you find a resource when you can just barely care for yourself during
Oh,
the day?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I use a document often. I keep threatening to create my own, but I haven't yet. But I use a document that Postpartum Support International puts out for people to do that planning, and it has like the basics of like this is the GP's phone number, this is the midwife or obstetrician's phone number, this is the number of your therapist if somebody already has a therapist, this is the number of a therapist you might want to contact if it gets to that.
Yeah.
Um,
Your doula, your lactation consultant,
yes, exactly.
yeah, all the
All of
people
those,
on the team.
yeah, all of those things right there. I'm also doing a fertility support group.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, I
that's
should talk
great.
about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sponsored by the Butterfly Run, which is an organization that supports folks struggling with fertility and bereaved parents. And so the first group in person will be September 25th from 6:30 till 8 at Full Moon Physio. And then we're going to alternate every second week. There's a group, but we're alternating between in person and virtual um, because we kind of just want to cover the gamut for the time being. Sometimes virtual can feel safer for people because they can keep their camera off. Coming in somewhere feels intimidating. And we also know that connecting in person can be really beneficial. So we're trying both this
I love
fall
that. That's great.
to see how that goes. And the group is totally free to attend. I just ask that folks touch base with me beforehand because I've got like a brief registration form. And the reason I have that is just to get an idea of where people are at because I do like to prepare some activities, which sometimes we get to, sometimes we don't. But just so I know sort of where people are at on the spectrum of struggling with fertility. And then it's a drop in group. So again, we know that if folks are coming every week, they're probably going to get more benefit of it out of it because they're building relationships with people. But if you can't come, there's no obligation, right? It's you can come as you're able, and if you can't, you can't, and you can come to the in person and only the in person, or the online and only the online, or you can come to both.
That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah, so they just need to register and then they can kind of come as they are able,
exactly. Yeah,
essentially. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and then it should be on Zoom. So prior to the virtual one, we would send out a Zoom link. But otherwise, yeah, it's pretty casual. Just shoot me an email and we just go from there.
Okay. And is that open to folks who don't live in the Comox Valley for the virtual sessions
As long as they're in BC.
in BC? Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. And so you said you'd run some activities. What are those? What do those look like?
Um, so we've done letter writing. We've written to our diagnosis. We've written to a future child potentially. We've written to our fertility doctor or a doctor who has triggered us one way or another.
Right.
And so lots of different. I love using letter writing. We've done some more creative things, which works great for some people, and for some people they felt more shy about it. But um, we've done some sort of like I don't even know what you call it, but some drawing. Not I'm not an artist at all, but I love using creative endeavors in therapy because it can tap into different parts of our brain. So, some drawing around words that we identify with. So, usually I prepare an activity for the group, and if everyone would rather just talk about what's going on for them and maybe do some grounding exercises and that sort of thing, then that's what we do. But if everyone wants to do the activity, then we do the activity because I feel strongly that it's their group, um, and
Right.
we want to make sure that people are getting out of it what they came for. Generally speaking, people want to do the activity though. So
Good.
yeah,
Yeah, I love the letter writing. I think that would probably be beneficial at any point in your life.
absolutely. I use it a lot for disenfranchised grief as well.
Mm.
Um, just in general, whether it's a pregnancy loss or again or infertility. But yeah, with my one-on-one clients, I often recommend letter writing.
And do you recommend they keep the letter or burn it or?
That depends.
Yeah.
It really depends. Sometimes it can be cathartic when there's a lot of anger associated with it to burn it.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have clients that have done that. And yeah, I would say it depends on what they're writing the letter for. If it's a case of writing to, um, a pregnancy loss or infertility, then sometimes they have sort of a safe space that they keep that. And that's part of that sort of ceremony around that grief.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And so you're working out of Full Moon Physio now. Do you still have a Comox office or just Full Moon?
Full moon as of October 1st.
As of October 1st. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Exciting. Great.
It is exciting. Yeah. I'm just in the process of, furnishing my office and figuring out all those details
Yeah.
and stuff. But it'll be great to be down there with like an interdisciplinary team who's primarily serving the same clients. And
Yes.
yeah, it's going to be a great space.
Yeah. So for those who are listening, Full Moon Physio has perinatal mental health now. They have physiotherapists, chiropractors, I think, and sometimes Pilates classes and
Yes.
yoga classes.
Yes.
And so a full kind of like spectrum of perinatal health resources for you to check out. I will put their website in the show notes. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I'll make sure that's there for you and you guys can go check it out and you can see Tasha there once she's there in October. And until then, you're seeing clients out of your office in Comox. That's correct?
Yeah. I have an office on Guthrie.
Okay.
So yeah, until then I will be seeing clients there or virtually. I do find when folks are like brand new postpartum, they prefer virtual because getting out of the house can
Oh
feel
gosh,
big.
no kidding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I do mostly home visits as a lactation consultant. It's
Yeah.
because it's like asking you to pack up your baby and all the things, and like you're so fresh and raw in this postpartum state. It's just, yeah, that's not going
I
to help anything.
I had a client say to me the other day, every time I feel I'm leaving the house, I feel like I'm preparing for war.
Oh God.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The nervous system gets activated
Yes.
and you start sweating.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I will mention too, once I'm down at full moon, like we're sharing a space, but I'll still have my own website and booking software and all that. So I have my own Jane app that folks will book through that won't change once I move
Okay.
over there.
Awesome. Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today, Tasha. It was really, really helpful, and I think a lot of people are going to find a lot of value in what they heard today, and hopefully they find the courage to reach out for help when they need it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
To reach Tasha or to book online for her counseling services, head to her website at glaciercounseling.com or email her at hello@glaciercounseling.com. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any questions or need more information, please feel free to email me at info@soundbirths.ca. And don't forget to rate the show and share it with your friends. Episodes are released 1 to 2 times a month. Until next time, take care.